Being very entitled and controlling, narcissists have no difficulty stepping all over your personal boundaries. So that's why I put together an extensive video class called This Is Me. It has 25 videos, written documents, guided questions. I'm going to teach you how to have healthy boundaries. There's a link below, and I hope you'll find it to be quite therapeutic. Let's acknowledge up front that family is a system of individuals that can bring out both the best and the worst in one another. Now, on the positive side, in the ideal, we can say that a family can be your safe haven. When family members gather together, you can feel like, oh, good, I'm with my people. We have each other's back. Perhaps you've heard the old saying that family are the people that will take you when nobody else will. We can have this notion that says no matter what's going on during the year, we can finally get together and enjoy one another's company. I know these videos that you sometimes see on the news where somebody's been in the military and they've been deployed for quite some time, and then they come back and they film them surprising family members when they get home, and everybody's joyous and so pleased to see them. It's nice when you have something like that. In family systems, we can offer one another love and support and shared values. It's where you can go and feel like I'm with my people. Now, there are many times, though, when family members will get together at all sorts of gatherings and it blows up and it turns into something that nobody wanted it to be, and whatever that ideal is that you wish you could have simply doesn't exist there. And there are multiple reasons that family gatherings can fall apart, because you see, narcissism can come into those scenarios with all of its insensitivities and manipulations and attitudes of condescension toward one another. And it can be rather ugly at times. I've heard so many stories to that effect. Let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Sometimes you can have difficulties when families are trying to get together because there's been a divorce with one or two or three or four key members of the family, and you don't know how to coordinate your schedules, or someone on the other side is making things very difficult. Sometimes you can have problems because a person has had a history of abuse with individuals inside that family, and they're thinking, oh, now I have to go back and be with that in the presence of that person that I just can't stand the presence of. Sometimes addictions can rear their ugly heads in one form or another, or alcohol can be misused when there are families that get together. Sometimes there have been some secrets that have been revealed inside family systems. Let's say, for example, an individual was involved in domestic abuse, and now everybody knows about it, or an affair was discovered, or it may be that a family member has declared themselves to be in a very different place philosophically and lifestyle from the way that the traditional family says, and people are getting together now and thinking, well, what are we going to do because we don't like what somebody else has done? And it can create its own form of tension, and it's just gurgling right there at the surface. Everybody knows that it's there, and you don't want to step on a topic that is going to be off label, so to speak. Sometimes in family gatherings, you have a new member that has shown up, whether it's an in-law or the in-laws' in-laws that can come along, and they can bring all sorts of disruptive features there. Sometimes you just have that bossy, controlling, we have to do everything my way and we schedule everything according to my mandates, and everybody gets mad because of that. Sometimes you have that one person or several persons who are extremely opinionated, and they start pushing their opinions on loaded topics, whether it's social issues or politics or religion or the state of the world or whatever it might be, and then they chide other individuals for not going along with that, and before you know it, arguments will fall apart there. There are simply times when you have these kinds of scenarios, and you walk away from those family gatherings thinking, why did I even bother? Why am I having to subject myself to something that is predictably going to be disruptive? I'd like to share some personal things here with you. I normally don't, but I'd like to talk with you on a personal level about how my wife and I have had to come to terms with things like this. Starting with my wife, She was the oldest of 4 kids. She has 2 sisters and 1 brother, and she came from a family home that was dominated by a father who, to say was bombastic would be an understatement. I mean, literally, my wife says she can hardly think of anything positive to say about him because he was always in a bad mood, had lots of rages, and she has many stories of birthdays and Christmas and vacation and Thanksgiving falling apart because he threw a temper tantrum for who knows what. And the brother that she had, who was just he's died since, who was about a year and a half younger than her. When he became a teenager, he would push back, and it would get loud and ugly. And then the father died. The brother, in his adult years, became very difficult. He only had a brief marriage, but he was single most of the time that I knew him. And whenever it was time for a family gathering, whatever it might be, a holiday or something of that nature, the question was, are we going to let him come over? Because there would be so many times when he would just bring tons of strain and tension. Sometimes he had a dog that he would bring with him, and he would beat the dog in front of everybody, and people would get mad, and the kids would cry, and he would argue, and folks would go home early. And it'd be like, why are we doing this? Why are we having to put up with something that we don't like? And then on the Carter side of the family, literally, when I was a brand new baby, I'm a twin. I was born in Augusta, Georgia. When I was a brand new baby with my brother and I, my mother was 23 years old. She and my dad brought us home, and we were born in Augusta, Georgia. That's how Gus got his name. And my mother's mother from Atlanta came over to Augusta to help out with 2 little infants crying all the time, I'm sure. And within 2 days, they had to say, just go home. Your presence is not wanted here, because it was so disruptive and so difficult. That's how I started my life. I didn't know it at the time, but I was told about it later. She died when I was 8. I didn't really have a chance to get to know her very well. My father recalls times when the families would get together, and it's like, we cannot invite Dad's grandfather, because he was probably one of the meanest people that ever walked the face of the earth. My dad would talk about how he was dreadfully afraid of his own grandfather because he was so harsh and mean, and be like, we don't want him around. My father's father, to his credit, moved away from the family, small town, and moved into the big city of Atlanta and got away, but he had his anger issues. And so we would have issues with respect to what are we going to do with people inside the Carter family. At age 22, I got married, and I married too early. I wasn't ready. I thought I was, but I wasn't. And 15 years later, I found myself being divorced. And then when you have something like that, then you have all of these questions of what are we going to do, and trying to coordinate schedules because this isn't going to work and that's not going to work. And then somebody else says, well, let's do this instead and that instead, and people get frustrated and tense. I bring all of this up to say none of us are immune. And there are times when you can think, well, I'm trying my best to be a positive presence here inside the family, but there can be so much extra tension that comes to the surface when families get together that it just becomes a great potential for all of the difficulty and strain and insensitivity to gurgle to the surface. You see, we go back and we say that family ideally is supposed to be our ultimate safe place, but then there are times when it's not, and then what makes it worse is the people that are involved. You know, this is my father that we're talking about, or my own mother, or my sister, or my brother-in-law, or the kids, and nobody likes, so-and-so's children, and they make it very clear, and why are we having to deal with all of this? We shouldn't be having these kinds of problems. And then I've had people that will simply say to me, I just don't like the members of my family, and I don't like feeling obliged to have to go and spend time with them, but there I am one more time, and the whole thing can blow up, and it can create its own version of strain and stress. Now, I share all these things with you to remind you, and this is so important for you to recognize, you're not alone. Sometimes you may feel like, well, everybody else seems to be having a wonderful time during their family holidays, but there are plenty of other individuals who could say, oh, I can top your story, or you may have this, I don't have that, but I have this instead. And so you don't need to feel ashamed when you feel like these things are happening to you, thinking, well, I'm just out here on an island all by myself. You're not. Let's remember that a certain amount of brokenness is built into the human experience. And I know that's a sad truth to have to remind ourselves of. It's regretful, and yet there it is. There's no such thing as perfection. People can have their strains and difficulties, and at times when the ideal is supposed to happen, that's when the less than ideal just takes on more of a magnified kind of position. Let's just be honest about those kinds of things. And then let's remember that at the core, narcissism is about control and selfishness, and that's when it can gurgle up in some of these family scenarios. But I want you to ask yourself, when I see these controlling and selfish and insensitive kinds of things happening, do I become a participant in that? Do I find myself going in and pushing against things that I know aren't going to be changed, but I do it anyway? Or am I the kind of individual that says, I have a bigger game plan that I have in mind, and these kind of family gatherings are not going to bring out the worst in me? Also, it's necessary for you to remind yourself you're not completely obliged to go along with the flow when that flow is pretty negative. And I know that some of you, it's like, well, I still want to go to these family gatherings because there are some people there that I enjoy. But it may be that you'll need to make alterations with respect to your participation. For example, if you have a family gathering and it's going to last several days, well, you may need to just make it an overnight kind of thing. Or if it's an extended day and everybody's supposed to be there, you may need to give yourself permission to take a walk or go to a separate part of the house. Or it may be that some ones don't need to be invited. It's okay for you to say that. It may be that you'll even get to a point of saying, I'm going to need to minimize my contact with some of these individuals. For certain events, I may just take a pass. The bottom line is that being inside a family and then having these family gatherings is not some sort of requirement that you have to do when there's going to be abuse and gross insensitivity. You are not obliged to expose yourself to something that's going to bring you down repetitively and predictably. I've had many individuals who have said to me, gladly, they've said, when families are required to get together, and it's my family, but there's the dysfunction is too strong, I've decided to give priority to my own mental health. And then many of those same people will say, and it was the best decision that I ever made. Practice self-care. Remind yourself that you're not obliged to be in the presence of gross dysfunction, and then do what makes sense to you. Follow your path of wisdom as opposed to following the path of insensitivity and unnecessary obligation. And I hope that videos such as this can give you some good awareness of what you're dealing with. If you've not already hit that subscribe button, I would encourage you to do so. We're going to keep more videos coming towards you. If you have a need to unpack these kind of things, and right now, there are plenty of folks that say, I could use some help. I've been sponsored for years by the people at BetterHelp.com. And it's a team of licensed professional therapists. It's an online service. There's a link below that will take you to their website. And it's affordable, it's accessible, it's effective, and so please, if the need is there to try to figure out what your strategies are going to be, get the help that you need. Likewise, I have my courses, and these are very extensive online classes you can sign up for. Each course has at least 25 videos with written documentation, guided questions. We have Ready, Set, Connect, making good connections. This is me about establishing boundaries, free to be, finding yourself despite the controllers. We have my webinars, which are presented in a very different kind of format. These are all on the website that we have, in addition to my podcasts, plenty of articles, my books, so plenty of resources. Yes, family represents an ideal, but family is also a place where emotions can come apart and blow up, and you don't need to be a part of that. So practice self-care. Determine that you've got a game plan that includes DRC, dignity, respect, and civility, starting with offering that to yourself. And in doing so, I hope that you can have a time of steadiness and consistency despite some of the inconsistency in front of you. And ultimately, you can remain a person of peace.